Hello, my name is James Armstrong and I'm a teacher of politics. In this video I'm going to be talking about the 1997 election. Now this is a really important election for lots of reasons, but in terms of what we're concerned about, it's the only election that you have to study on the specification, and therefore if you get an essay about elections, it's a good idea to put 1997 in there. In addition to 1997, of course, you need to study one election at least after 1997 and one election before, and my suggestion is that you try and study as many elections as possible. So why 1997? Why does the specification really focus on that election? Well, it's a big turning point in British politics because Blair wins a huge landslide of 179 seats. That's the size of Blair's majority. So a huge majority following a 10% swing from Labour to the Conservatives. So it's a huge earthquake in British politics. We go from 18 years of Conservative rule, first under Mrs Thatcher winning 3 terms, and then of course under John Major for another 7 years after Mrs Thatcher steps down in 1990. And then we have a Labour government, and a Labour government that goes on to win 3 successive general election victories. And it's a terrible result for the Conservative Party. It is their worst result. You'd need to go back to the Duke of Wellington in the 19th century to find a result as bad for the Conservative Party. It's an absolutely abysmal result. The Conservative Parliamentary Party are wiped out. It is a devastating night for them. There's no way of overselling just how bad this is for the Conservative Party. And it brings in a new government, a new Labour government. Blair says on the steps of Downing Street, a new dawn has broken, has it not? This is a Prime Minister that is young, dynamic, and projects a sense that he represents a new Britain, a modern Britain, cool Britannia, the Britain of Oasis and Blur and the Spice Girls. Okay, so what's the context of the election? Well, Major goes into the election leading a minority government as a result of deaths, by-election defeats, resignations from the Conservative Party. He no longer has a majority, and therefore his position in parliamentary terms is very vulnerable. If you are leading a minority government, it means that you don't have a guaranteed majority when it comes to passing votes in the House of Commons in order to win debates or make law. And so you're in a precarious position. And his position was particularly precarious because his party was bitterly divided. And it started really with John Major trying to pass the Maastricht Treaty. This had led to a group of conservative rebels known as the Maastricht Rebels to cause John Major a whole heap of trouble. And so Europe, and particularly this issue of the Maastricht Treaty, was causing divisions in the party. As I've said, Blair takes over as leader in 1994. Now, Blair is an incredible leader, an incredible politician. He is very charismatic. He's incredible at, I would say that he's a very good political teacher. He's able to articulate an argument. He's believable. And in those early years, it's difficult to imagine now, but in those early years, he's regarded as Teflon Tony. He's seen as trustworthy by the British public. And in fact, he's one of the most popular leaders of the opposition ever. And his leadership ratings remain high, and certainly higher than John Major throughout his time as leader of the opposition. And he continues to modernise the party. We've talked about how Kinnock had inherited a party from Michael Foot that was regarded as being on the far left, and Kinnock takes on the militants in his own party, gradually moves the party towards the centre ground. Well, that process is concluded by Tony Blair, who absolutely crushes the left within the party and the sort of the final nail in the coffin, really, for the left is getting rid of Clause 4 in the party's constitution. Now, Clause 4 was the clause that had committed the party to nationalising industry. And for the left of the party, that is absolutely central to what the Labour Party should be doing. Because for the left, socialism is all about transferring power, ownership and control of the means of production, of industry, to the workers. And the Labour Party under Blair no longer stands for this. It gets rid of Clause 4. And that sends a message to voters. It sends a message to voters that Labour really has changed. Whilst Kinnock had changed the branding of the party, introducing the red rose and replacing the red flag, Blair is saying to voters, we really have changed. This is not a surface level change. And of course they do change the name. They call themselves New Labour. And that's in order to draw a clear contrast with old Labour, the Labour of the left, the Labour of people like Michael Foot and Tony Benn. This is a new Labour Party, a party that is close to the centre ground of British politics. And he's facing a Conservative Party. I've already mentioned that they're divided. They're also dogged by allegations of sleaze. There are a number of sex scandals amongst Tory politicians. There's the Cash for Questions affair, which involved Conservative members of Parliament selling the right to ask questions within the House of Commons. There was a scandal over arms to Iraq. So there was a sense that this government was sleazy and corrupt. And that was the sort of final nail in the coffin for the Conservative Party as well. Their reputation had really been trashed, though, by crashing out of the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, the ERM, in September 1992, on a day that's become known as Black Wednesday. And this really, it trashed the Conservatives' reputation for economic competence. And you can see, if you look at the opinion polls following Black Wednesday, that there's a really clear correlation between Black Wednesday happening and then Labour moving well ahead of the Conservative Party in the polls. And that poll lead, by the time they get to the election in 1997, is a good 20 points. So now if we look at the campaign, well, it was a long campaign. It's one of the longest campaigns that we look at, 6 weeks long. And Major wanted to have a long campaign because he felt that the longer the campaign was, the more he'd be able to expose the weaknesses of the Labour Party. And the Conservatives really want to focus on this idea that Labour actually hasn't changed. And so there's a really sort of terrifying campaign poster with Blair's face, with his big red eyes, and the slogan is New Labour, New Danger. And that's also taken up by the Conservatives in an election advert that constantly repeats this message of New Labour, New Danger. And what they're trying to do, what they're trying to say to voters is, you can't trust this guy. Labour hasn't changed. If you vote Labour, it'll be a vote to go back to the 1970s, back to the days of high inflation, high unemployment, low growth, unions going on strike all of the time, all of those problems that we, the Conservative Party, solved. Now, Labour are trying to fight against that. So it is a very, very modest pitch to the voters, and it is that modest pitch is crystallised really in a pledge card. So Blair puts 5 key pledges on that pledge card, one of which is, for example, not to put up the basic rate of income tax. There are also pledges on cutting class sizes, on being tough on crime, but they're really, really straightforward pledges, and he sends around these pledge cards. And I think the most important pledge there is the pledge not to put up income tax. Remember, in 1987, big mistake that Kinnock made was he said he would put up tax, and the Tories were therefore able to attack him, saying that a vote for Labour was a vote for £1,000 per year of tax increases. In actual fact, Blair goes into this election saying that the Tories are the ones that have been putting up tax whilst they've been in office. And Labour say we're not going to put up tax. The campaign is also, for the Conservative Party, it's disrupted by the entry into the campaign of the Referendum Party. Now, you can think of the Referendum Party as a precursor to UKIP and the Brexit Party. This is the first time in British politics that there's been a party sort of devoted to Euroscepticism. And the Referendum Party come in asking for a referendum on our membership of the European Union. And so those divisions in the Conservative Party over Europe that I discussed become very prominent in the campaign. Now, the role of the media is very important in this election because The Sun, which is the newspaper in the UK with the biggest circulation, and it's still over 3 million people are reading The Sun at this point in time. The Sun switches sides. So the Sun newspaper on their headline says, "The Sun backs Blair, give change a chance." And this is absolutely critical. It means that Labour have an advantage over the Conservatives when it comes to the circulation of national newspapers supporting the Labour Party rather than the Conservative Party. And therefore, the Murdoch empire is no longer backing the Tories and no longer attacking the Labour Party and saying that they're unfit for office. So the media changes sides, and we get the result. And as I've said, the Conservative Party are reduced to 165 seats in the House of Commons. They lose 171 seats, whereas the Labour Party gain 147. The Liberal Democrats also do well under Paddy Ashdown. They go up to 46 seats. So this is an absolute landslide election. It's epitomised by, on election night, the so-called Portillo moment. Michael Portillo was a member of the Conservative Party, a Conservative MP and cabinet member, who was seen as the obvious choice to lead the party in the future. The Conservative Party's answer to Blair, if you like, a young, dynamic leader who would be able to move the party on from this defeat, and he loses his seat in the early hours of the morning. So it's devastating for the Conservative Party. So what explains the results? Well, the mainstream view of this election is that this is an election that occurs the way that it does after a process of change, with the party gradually modernising with the leadership of Kinnock and John Smith, of course, and that this is all about Labour moving the party back to the centre ground. And the theory of voting behaviour that is relevant here is called the median voter theory. And that theory says if you're going to win an election, what you need to do is move the party to the centre ground of British politics, because that's where the average voter is. So that's what a lot of people think. The other key thing, of course, is the impact of Black Wednesday. So the Labour Party had put themselves in the position where they were electable, and the Conservative Party were fatally damaged in terms of the credibility of the party and of John Major because of Black Wednesday. So these two things came together and resulted in a completely unassailable lead for the Labour Party in the polls, 20 percentage points, and of course, therefore that led to a very, very expected landslide election victory. Now, of course, there were other things going on. I've already mentioned The Sun switching sides with its 3.7 million readers. Blair was a charismatic figure. I've said He was an exceptional politician, still is, in terms of communicating with the public and being a political teacher, really making an argument, making a case to the British public. I mean, the other thing is, the Conservative Party had been in power for 18 years. And people just get fed up of the same party being in power. There comes a point where it's just time for change. And so this was one of those moments, you could say, where the Conservative Party had been in office for a very, very long time. And of course, the longer you're in office, the more things are going to go wrong. And the more people are going to have resentments that build up. In the early days of an administration, you're sorting problems out and you're benefiting from maybe fixing the mess that the last government left behind. And there's an extent to which you can blame the previous government for things that go wrong. But the longer you're in office, the more you've got to take responsibility for the country, and the more resentment is going to build. And of course, there were divisions in the Conservative Party. We've talked about them. It's often said that divided parties don't win elections. And of course, during the election campaign, these divisions were very much to the fore. And Labour had also modernised themselves, detoxified themselves from the image of them that had been presented by the Conservative Party over the years as being a divided party, as being a party of the so-called loony left. So given everything I've said, it's not an unexpected victory for Labour. I think probably what surprised people is the sheer scale of the landslide. So there we have it. That's 1997. Really, really important election, landslide election victory for the Labour Party. And of course, it ushers in 3 consecutive election victories for the Labour Party. Next time, I'm going to talk about the 2001 election.